Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming, although there's not much else on today to distract you. The Conservative Party has been one of the most successful democratic parties in the Western world, and the natural party of government in the United Kingdom for well over a century. And I say that because it's just worth reminding ourselves of this during the periods of self-doubt to which the party is prone. Perhaps it's prudent, even necessary, to have such heart-searching, but it's no excuse for the sort of self-induced negativity that occasionally afflicts British conservatism. So today, as we embark on the leadership contest that will select a new Prime Minister, we need to remember some of the fundamental benefits that this Conservative government has delivered, like record levels of employment, rising living standards, record levels of exports, and foreign investment pouring in to the United Kingdom. So when we look at our polling performance, is it simply a case, as our Australian counterparts would say, that there are many quiet Conservatives out there, silenced or drowned out by the shrill voices of metropolitan Liberals? Or is something more subtle afoot? Is the Conservative tribe really lost, or is it just misplaced? I believe that we need to look to our history to understand our current position and to navigate the road ahead. When we set out our beliefs with confidence and express them in language that voters understand, this has tended to coincide with our periods of greatest political success. Why? Because our fundamental values are those which strike a chord with men and women from all walks of life up and down our country. Now, if that's so, you might reasonably say, why do we not win every time? And I think the answer is twofold. First, voters don't always hear us talking about the things we believe in, rather than just talking about ourselves. And secondly, they may hear what we say, but they perceive there to be a gap between what we say and what we do. So let me deal with the first of those today. In what do we believe? I want to just set out what makes me a Conservative, why I came from a very ordinary background to having a political career serving in public life for over 25 years. Now, many of the reasons will sound self-evident, but behind them lies a clear worldview, which leads to a very different destination, a very different Britain, and a very different world to its socialist alternative. And my message to all our fellow citizens, voters and non-voters, old and young alike, is this: if you believe these things, then you are a Conservative too, whether you realise it or not, whether you vote for us or not, and whether you're a party member or not. So let me begin with the basics. This is what I believe. Firstly, the first duty of any government is to protect the lives, the safety, and the property of its citizens. And without the proper resources for our defence, our intelligence services, and our police, we are failing in our primary duty. And most politicians will recite the mantra, but all too often corners are cut in practice. One of the most basic functions of taxation, and the one most readily accepted, is that defence and security are better and more efficiently conducted at the collective rather than the individual level. All too often, however, when there is a public and a media clamour for higher spending in one area or another, it's all too easy to divert funding away from the less visible defence budget. And it is a course fraught with risk. But while it protects our safety and security, the government has another simultaneous function to perform. In protecting and safeguarding the security of the nation, it also must protect and safeguard the rights and freedom of each citizen. That is why access to justice, and above all an independent judiciary, are so vital to that most delicate yet fundamental balance, liberty with security. And of course, defending the United Kingdom is more than just about hard and soft power. Underpinning the political values that I'm speaking about this evening is our unwavering commitment to the union of our nations that is the United Kingdom itself. And we must recognise that we've become much more than simply a political construct, a family of nations in every sense, stronger together and rejecting the negative and destructive forces of nationalism. Now next, it's imperative to me that we live in a society where economic and political power are vested in individuals on the basis of their talents, their efforts, and their achievements. It is both a mindset and a practical approach to governing. It requires us to understand that it's not just about trying to get to the top for the most able. We also need to understand that getting from the bottom rung of the ladder to the second bottom rung of the ladder is as important as getting from the second top to the top rung of the ladder. For me, meritocracy is king. It's what defines conservatism against the social planning and manipulation of the socialist alternative. But having noble aspirations is not enough. We must provide the means by which they can be achieved. It means providing the most important tool of all to everyone if we are to realise the individual talents upon which we collectively depend. And that is education. Education is the key to meritocracy. Without proper access to quality education, there will be no real ability to grasp opportunity, whether as an individual or at a national or international level. Now, I was fortunate in that, although I didn't grow up in a wealthy household, I grew up in a home where education was valued both for its own sake and for the opportunities it can bring. My father was a teacher, and in the first generation of his family to go to university, so my parents saw education as the key to a better future. We were encouraged to read, to question, and to have opinions, although I'm not sure that all of mine turned out exactly the way that my parents might have intended. I was also fortunate enough to grow up in Scotland at a time when it was famed for enjoying excellence in the state education system. I went to one of the largest comprehensive schools in Europe. I had 50 in my form class, and then went on to study medicine at university. Now, in those days, it would have been largely unthinkable that someone from my background would go on to be a doctor, the chairman of the National Conservative Party, or a senior cabinet minister. But it was both the quality of the education I received and, equally importantly, the encouragement of my parents and teachers that made those things possible. And if education is to be optimised in our society, there must be a partnership between teachers and parents. Raising our young people should not solely be the responsibility of the state, but nor should parents be unsupported in providing encouragement, guidance, and instilling good values in their children. And that partnership is crucial to meritocracy. Next, we have to communicate the ideas that underpin conservative economic values, never taking for granted the lessons that one generation learns will necessarily be understood by the next. One of the great talents of Margaret Thatcher, particularly in opposition and in the early years of her government, was to express complex economic arguments in language that voters found easy to understand. And I remember, as many of you will, how she was mocked for what was condescendingly described by an overwhelmingly male establishment as housewife economics. Ideas around sound money and the need for nations like household to live within their means, they really resonated at a time when Britain was riddled with inflation and debt, but the fundamental truths remain the same today. And we need to make these arguments again and again and again, especially to younger voters, taking into account the changing economic circumstances in which we find ourselves. Arguments based on the need for sound money are actually a bit more difficult to make in an era where good conservative management has meant that inflation is low and money has tended to retain its value. It's always worth making the case, however, that inflation is not only an ever-present economic danger, but a threat to social stability. I would go as far as to say that there is a moral case to make against inflation, as it transfers resources from savers to borrowers and discourages personal responsibility, something of even greater importance in an aging population where there are finite state resources. Now, for many of us, the economic belief that has shaped our policy pronouncements since the 1980s is the unavoidable truth that there is no such thing as public money, only taxpayers' money. Yet, at the 2017 election, it was disconcerting to find out how many, young voters in particular, were seduced by Labour's promises of increased spending across the board. It is particularly important to point out to them, even more than to the rest of the population, that reckless spending by government today will be paid for in taxes from the wage packets of the future. Far from being the champion of young voters, a high-spending left-wing government would be a toxic curse, leaving them with increased tax bills for the whole of their working lives, and it would mean that they and their families would be saddled with the cost of Labour's failure, unable to benefit fully from their own efforts and talents. Indeed, no individual, no household and no country can or should continually live beyond their means. Of course, there are times when we may find that short-term debt and borrowing may be unavoidable, even sensible on occasions, but a society based on debt rather than savings leaves itself much more open to external shocks beyond its own control, with all the potential consequences in terms of lost prosperity and diminished security. And those basic truths need to be allied with other sound conservative principles that underpin economic analysis. We need to re-emphasize that markets work. And markets work because they are the combined wisdom of millions of people, rather than the applied opinions of a self-appointed political elite. Yet it's equally important to point out that markets do not work if you reward failure the same way as you reward success. For instance, many of us would, I think, be rightly critical of the pay and bonus culture in the banking sector in the run-up to the financial crisis in 2008, where excessive sums were paid to those who were in fact overseeing failing financial institutions and who left the price to be paid by taxpayers and those who succeeded them. And if we accept that properly regulated markets are an inherently good thing, then competition is the essential component of their health. Competition allows us to measure our talents, one against the other, within the law and without conflict. Competition leads to greater diversity and more choice, which in turn produces the innovation that is the gateway to furthering human capability. The anti-competitive essence of socialism, from the school playing fields where winning is discouraged, to the penal tax rates that punish success and send investors abroad, is one of its most destructive manifestations. We should reinforce that profit is a good thing, but not at any price. Company profits are a route to more jobs and ultimately more taxes being paid, directly and indirectly, to support the provision of public services such as healthcare, education and defence. And punishing successful businesses is a sure route to turning off the spending tap to the services most valued in our country. So, becoming the repository of the British people's aspiration is key to the electoral success of the Conservative Party. Every white van man and woman should see us as their champion. Every corner shop owner who stays open late to provide extra consumer service should gravitate towards us. And every small business owner who sacrifices family holidays and household luxuries to survive, succeed and grow should see us, the Conservative Party, as their natural home. Now, over the past 3 years, I spent a great deal of time talking about the benefits of free trade. Open, free and fair trade, rooted in a sound and relevant international rules-based trading system, has repeatedly shown itself to be of huge benefit to both individuals and states, producers and consumers in both developed and developing countries alike. Indeed, as the world's emerging and developing economies have liberalized trade practices, prosperity has spread, bringing industry, jobs and wealth to where there was only once deprivation. According to the World Bank, the 3 decades between 1981 and 2011 witnessed the single greatest decrease in material deprivation in human history. 1 billion people taken out of abject poverty in 1 generation. That is why it is morally unthinkable to reject free and open trade. Those who genuinely want to liberate the world from the scourge of poverty should support free and fair trade, yet sadly the political left seem intent on pursuing an agenda which sees trade as a vice rather than a virtue. And it's not just in markets overseas where benefits are felt, but here at home too. Although it might not always be noticed, the wider benefits of a liberal trade policy are shared by consumers and households right across this country. It is not only vital in ensuring that supplies of raw materials and everyday essentials like food and clothing are available, it also increases the quality of those products, gives consumers a wider choice, and helps to drive down prices, making incomes go further for ordinary families. Free trade provides supermarkets with the ability to sell us a full range of foods all year round. It enables retailers to sell increasingly advanced technology at ever lower prices, from TVs to computers to mobile phones. These are the tangible benefits of trade, and their importance in improving the lives of all the people of Britain, whatever their income, should not be underestimated. Now, as with many freedoms, free and open trade can seem like an inherent fact of life. But the reality is, these freedoms and the benefits that they bestow have been hard won, and they must be continually defended from the siren call of protectionism, which would tip the global balance in favour of the rich against the poor and the strong against the weak. Conservatives do not believe that trade is an end in itself, but a means to an end. Free trade is a way in which we can ensure the greater spreading of prosperity. And that matters because prosperity underpins social cohesion. Social cohesion, in turn, underpins political stability. And political stability is the building block of our collective security. In other words, there is a continuum between prosperity and security that cannot be broken without unwanted consequences, be that greater migration across borders or creating the conditions that allow political radicalization to take hold. Finally, I want to take a look at what type of society we're trying to build. And many of the themes that are the foundation of conservative social policy readily strike a natural chord with the British people. So let me start with immigration. There are few subjects in our political discourse that are subject to such irrationality and sometimes frank hysteria as the subject of immigration. And politicians too often back away from a subject that matters hugely to voters. Immigration can bring many benefits to society, and Britain has a proud history of tolerance, integration, and cultural assimilation. At the more flippant level, you may have read recently that chicken tikka masala is now a true British national dish. Not only because it's now the most popular, but because it's a perfect illustration of the way that Britain absorbs and adapts external influences. But more seriously, immigration can only work if those coming into a country want to integrate with its resident population and culture, and where the host population of the country is willing to allow that integration to happen. And when immigration gets out of control, both of these are more difficult to achieve. We also need to understand that while diversity is enriching for a society, it also needs to celebrate and emphasize commonality, the things that unite us. And failure to do so can result not in diversity, but fragmentation. Essentially, different is good for a society, but separate is bad. If we are looking to get a steer on the direction of immigration policy for the times ahead, then I think we only need to listen to the attitudes regularly expressed by British voters, which of course are not very different from those expressed by Dutch voters, or French voters, or German voters. They will say that those who come to Britain and have a job, pay their taxes, and obey the law are welcome in our country. What is less welcome, they say, is where there are those who come to this country and utilise public services, such as housing and health, without having made any contributions to those services themselves. I don't believe politically it's rocket science. And in welfare, our basic approach also resonates with natural conservatives. I believe that we have an absolute duty to help those who cannot help themselves, and that this is the basis for a decent and caring society. But where there are people with individual talents that, for whatever reason, they decide not to use, it's important not just economically, but for reasons of self-esteem and self-worth that we provide all the necessary incentives and opportunities for those who can support themselves through work to do so. If the value that any individual has is only determined by how much the state will give them for inactivity, how can they ever truly understand their worth to themselves, their families, and their communities? And the dependency state, so often the result of socialist governments, destroys incentive, deprives society of talent, and saddles taxpayers with heavy financial burdens. And there's another fallacy of the left that we must tackle. We need to understand that poverty is not simply an economic or a financial issue. It's not just about the inability to afford material goods. The poverty of values, the poverty of aspiration, and the poverty of opportunity will debilitate both citizens and society, undermining personal responsibility and sapping that crucial sense of self-worth. That's why I believe that dignity is the partner of responsibility. With dignity comes socially responsible behaviour, but without self-respect, we will never be able to unlock the opportunity that lies within our society. And finally, perhaps the greatest difference between conservatives and our socialist opponents is that while we conservatives believe in equality of opportunity for all the reasons that I've just set out, the socialist believes in equality of outcome. While we believe in liberation conservatism, setting free and supporting the talents of individuals to reach their greatest potential, the socialists believe in social engineering to achieve a preconceived outcome that suits their political model. In conclusion, we conservatives treat people as they are, not how we would like them to be. We understand the motivations and dreams of our fellow citizens, enhancing their freedom, but yes, requiring responsibility, maximizing choice and therefore competition, and appealing to a belief in the possibility of one's own success. These aren't merely the ideals of a political ideology, but the fundamentals of human instinct. It is our duty to make this case once again in the way that it was once understood, to inspire a new generation to reject the fundamentalisms of socialism and restore faith in the philosophy of opportunity. So let us speak for those quiet conservatives, because they are all around us in our country, and ensure that our place in the next chapter of our nation's history is sealed, not for our own benefit, but for the prosperity, the security, and opportunity that the people of our united kingdom deserve to have. Thank you.
Thank you. So Liam has kindly agreed to answer some questions.
Well, I said I would take some questions.
Take some questions. Yes. Obviously,
Far away.
Well, there you go.
Dr. Fox, absolutely fascinating. You took us back to the history of the Conservative Party and its fundamental beliefs in defence and an independent judiciary. But if you go back even further to the 1834 Tamworth Manifesto, which was the fundamental basis for the whole of what we all believe in, Robert Peel addressed to the electors of Tamworth and also those people who were not of his party but believed in good governance. If that is fundamental to the Tory party beliefs, how do you explain that we now have this extraordinary system brought in by the Coalition Home Secretary Theresa May, of politically elected police and crime commissioners who owe their duty to their electors, obviously, rather than to the police which they are served, and politics is about what is done and also what is seen to be done. You cannot you cannot say that when you see a police and crime commissioner having been elected by 10% of the electorate, putting Labour or Conservative after his neck, that is an independent way of policing this country.
Well, I was always a little bit ambivalent about the concept itself. And I always thought, let's wait and see if it works. And I think it works better in some parts of the country than others. And I think it's very often, as in any system, about the quality of the people that put themselves forward for election and ultimately are chosen by the voters. Certainly where I live in Somerset, I think the system works quite well. I think there is a good balance. But I think it probably works better there than in other parts of the country. So I'm not entirely convinced yet about the model, but I'm not entirely convinced against the model either. And for me, the jury is still a little bit open on that.
I thought that your point about competition is absolutely right to focus on as a deal breaker for those of us who are wanting to make the case for the free market. That if it's a crony, capitalist, corporatist, cosy, lobbyist, subsidies for the rich, we're not going to win on that. But if it's about making it to do with competition, then that's absolutely critical. But it also needs to be applied to people in their everyday lives rather than just as a sort of abstract concept. To give a couple of examples, if I want to change a gas supplier or electricity supplier, I can. But Thames Water, I'm stuck with Thames Water. Why not have competition for? Why can't I choose different water supply? If the technical challenges can be overcome for gas and electricity, why not for water? And I was talking to Kenny earlier about the railway competition. If I go to Paddington, I want to go to Cornwall on holiday. I go to Paddington, go to St Austell. I have to go to Great Western. I think if I did want to go to Newcastle, obviously I don't. But I think there are some places where there's some competition. But it's a small little bit, isn't it? Sort of 10%. But why can't we have competition for railways, competition for water?
Well, I'm all for having more competition where it can be achieved. I think you need to balance that in a practical sense with a stable regulatory environment, because those overseas investors in particular who put a lot of funding into things like water infrastructure or power infrastructure want to ensure that the rules don't change during the period of their investment, which is one of the issues I face when I'm talking to global investors all the time. But where we can get more competition inside the system, all the better. And you look at the alternatives. The Labour Party would take us back to British Rail, where there is no competition whatsoever inside the railway system. And people, it's another lesson we need to try to remind people about. When you didn't have competition, and you couldn't, when you finally broke away from your party line, which doesn't mean what party line means now, you had to wait a long time to get your individual line, if you could get one. And the competition, the improvement in consumer service, that competition that came with privatisation brought about was truly transformational. I think sometimes we have to remind people of what the alternative is to where we are, but where we can go further with competition at every level. Competition is the thing that levels upwards. It raises standards because it makes people compete with the best practice, which becomes more widely disseminated. And I think we should never ever be afraid to argue for competition. But on your first point, I'm a capitalist, I'm not a corporatist. I don't believe in a system where people just move around from one firm to another, or worse, one part of local government to another, seemingly endlessly circulating the same people with increasingly big payoffs as they go through a system. I want to see genuine competition and genuine free markets in all of those areas. Yes.
Yeah, you spoke very passionately about education. Education obviously is a route out of poverty for a lot of people, and I'm just wondering what your views are on grammar schools. I know that in England grammar school is quite contradictory because they only exist in pockets, and therefore it's very hard to extrapolate any information from the existence of grammar schools, because obviously parents make sure the children go there. But if you take the example of Northern Ireland, where grammar school is grammar schools are available across the country, it's very clear that Northern Ireland has the highest A-level results, GCSE results, largest proportion of children from disadvantaged background going to university, etc. So it's very clear that it provides that route to success and that you described. So I'd just be interested to hear if you think that the Conservative Party would again champion grammar schools.
Well, I'm in favour of diversity in education, and I think that grammar schools are an essential part of that diverse mix of provision. And I think it will differ from one part of the country to another. I think it will differ according to traditions in different parts of the country. But I think if we do believe in diversity of provision, and we think that that's good because of the competition inside the system that produces, levelling up to a higher level of excellence, then I don't think that you, for political reasons, determine that one type of diversity is inappropriate compared to the rest. So I'm in favour of us having a diverse range of systems within which education can flourish. Sorry.
You go first.
So I just wanted to ask you to sort of go more broadly on some of those questions you've just been addressing. I mean, one of the benefits of a leadership contest and a change in leader is perhaps people can be a little more open than they might have otherwise been about the state of the party. I mean, without sort of getting into the minutiae of the leadership contest and who's promising what are the areas where you think the Conservative Party is keeping to these values that you outlined, and where are the areas that you'd like to see improvement?
Well, I'd like to see us actually make the case for conservatism and talk about what we believe in. We seem to be obsessed with personality in our political discourse today, with far too little discussion about why we come to the policy decisions that we do. And I would like to see more of that intellectual underpinning of what we do. We don't randomly choose policies, and it's not an accident that we're different from the socialist alternative. It's because we believe in very different things. We have a different worldview. The sorts of things I was talking about give us a profound difference in terms of how we see our country and how we see the people of our country than the all-controlling model that socialism wants to have. And I think sometimes we're too squeamish about actually talking about socialism and talking about the dangers of the alternative. It's almost as though we don't want to cause offence. Well, if I cause offence to the hard left, intolerant status, then I don't much care. And I'd like to hear more conservatives stand up and say not just what we believe, but why we believe it. And why we believe that the values that we have will give a different sort of Britain than the socialist model. Which is why I think the Conservative Party itself is so important. I think that Britain, without the Conservative Party, would be a very different Britain from what it's become over the years. And I think that having a robust, confident Conservative Party that knows not just what it wants to do, but why it wants to do it, is essential for the richness of our political system.
Yes, I first met Liam about 40 years ago at Glasgow University. That's a frightening thought, isn't it?
Well, I was still at school 40 years ago.
No, you were in terms of talking about the tribes. I have a similar background to yours, and as well as the teachers in my family, the influences were also the church and particularly the Scout movement and so on. What Edmund Burke might call the little platoons. And what I'm concerned about is that the Conservative Party really hasn't worked out how to engage with those tribes, how to communicate with them, how to involve them, how to really reach out to them. And to a certain extent, there's an element of preaching to the choir rather than speaking to the various groups who maybe are conservatives, as you say, but don't recognise themselves. But we seem to be in this position where the Conservative Party has lost the ability to reach out and communicate. And to a certain extent, the Brexit Party has done that very quickly through social media and so on. And to a certain extent, the Conservative Party is getting left behind. And I wondered how you might address that, either through the Cabinet or through whoever becomes the new leader.
Well, I think when you look at single issue parties, it's much easier to communicate a single issue in a short period of time. We are a much more complex entity that covers a whole range of policy areas. and that has a much more deep-seated sense of our own identity. And I think that communication's all very well, but you have to understand the product you're selling before you start the communication strategy. And I think that we need to get back to being very, very clear about who we are, where we've come from, what we believe, and therefore encompassing those, where we're going to go. And I think that there's far too much, if I may say, attempt to speak to one bit of society or another bit of society on a single thing, rather than having a coherent narrative about who we actually are. I think we're missing that essential step. And I think that when we are confident about who we are, what we believe in, the values that we have, I think that communication becomes much easier. Because when we're sure about who we are, it's much easier to talk to others. And I think that the essential strength of conservatism against what I see as the socialist alternative is that we don't see society as a collection of minorities. We see society as an enriched field of individuals with all their own talents, which, if we set them free, will be to our collective benefit. And this sort of political way of looking at a nation, which I suppose really began in the Clinton era, which looked at this as a minority, and if you cobble enough minorities together, you get a majority, is not how I think about my country. And it's certainly not how I think about the people of my country.
You already talked about Mrs. Thatcher's ability to be able to communicate about economics, but one of the key things that she did that pulled in a lot of voters, like my mum and dad, who came from a background where they should have voted Labour but didn't, was her agenda around popular capitalism, where she gave people a real strong financial stake, economic stake in the future of the country, whether it was owning a home, share ownership, or getting grants to start their own business. We seem to have lost a bit of that kind of emphasis at the moment, and I just wondered how you thought we could kind of reignite that real kind of energy that she created around that popular capitalist agenda.
Well, as I said, I think that what we have to have is a political message that says, if you're the white van man or woman, if you're the corner shop owner, you're the small business owner, we are your natural party. I think the Conservative Party should be defined as the party of the small business, because that is what our economy has become, largely because of those reforms of the 1980s, which are still coming to fruition today. But we've got to get the message very clear. And it's not just that they should be our natural supporters, we have to say why. Why we are the natural party of small business. And when you look at the actual success that we're having at the present time, with the lowest unemployment for 45 years, with the growth in small businesses, with our exports, £640 billion last year, an all-time high for the UK, with foreign direct investment coming more to the UK in the first quarter of this year than any other country on the globe. We're having a lot of the success. The trouble is we're not owning the success politically. And that's what worries me, is the disconnect between what's happening in our real economy and the benefit or lack of it that the Conservative Party is reaping from having that very successful economy. And part of that, undoubtedly, is the Brexit debate, because the entire bandwidth is so taken up by the Brexit debate that we're actually in danger of failing to own the tremendous economic performance that the country has at the present time, and not to get the credit where actually it is due.
Angus Walker, ITV News. On the subject of competition, do any of the other candidates in the leadership race have a chance, or are they just lying down in front of the Boris bulldozer? And would you encourage some of the other candidates to withdraw and come behind Jeremy Hunt to speed up this two-horse race?
Well, I've got a very clear rule in this contest, that I do not speak about other candidates other than the candidate I'm supporting. I'm not against other candidates. I'm supporting Jeremy for the reasons I've set out before. I think he is very much in tune with those small businesses, because that's where he comes from. He understands success and failure in business, which is crucial in a free enterprise society. He understands from his background that you have to make deals to go forward. And I think he's got a very a very positive message for uniting the Conservative Party, which will be essential. And what other candidates do is their business. And I think that if all the candidates simply stuck to their own merits and why they themselves wanted to lead the party, it would all be much nicer as a spectator sport, and it would enable us to see with clarity what the candidates' merits are, rather than concentrating on what they perceive may be the failures of other candidates. Play nice, we have to come together afterwards.
So going back to a theme that's come up from several of the questions, for me the issue is not the message. It was quite a complex argument that you had to put together. It took you about 25 minutes. And if you compare that with the socialist argument, I don't like it, but for the many, not the few, is a very strong, distinct argument. That sort of
It's a lie, but it's
maybe, but it's
a succinct lie.
Yeah, and for me the challenge is to get your 25-minute argument into those 2 or 3 bullets that Mrs. Thatcher, as we've all said, did so brilliantly with the popular capitalism, with sound money. And do you think that's the failure of the current leadership, being able to make that succinct and that appealing against the simplistic socialist argument?
So when I started out with this, I called it the new 10 Commandments. Here are the things you need to believe to be a conservative. And we do need to get it into a very usable and saleable form. And we say, this is what we believe in, that we believe in that security is the first duty of the government. We believe in sound money. We believe that you should never live beyond your means. Setting through all these different elements, that we believe in opportunity, competition, that markets work. Just setting them all out, we can get them down. Because we tried it to get it down into 10 very short points. And I think that's what we will need to do, because we need to have what I call liberation conservatism, and we need to tell the country, if you want the talents of this wonderful country to be genuinely liberated and to benefit from opportunity, you can only do it through a conservative model, because the socialist alternative is about top-down control. We're the liberators. They are those who would imprison opportunity and talent.
On the free trade point, you said that it was hard won and we still need to defend it. How optimistic are you, given Brexit, given the socialists, that the UK will continue to be, in 12 months' time, a strong voice for free trade going forward?
So I've just come back from the G20 trade ministers in Japan. I can't say it was the most optimistic I've felt in recent times. There's no doubt that there are strong headwinds developing in global trade. There's a tendency to move away from a very open liberal market. Since the 2008 financial crisis, the G20 countries have increased the number of non-tariff barriers to trade from about 300 to nearly 1,500. And if the most prosperous countries start to take the attitude that, well, we've done very well out of this system, now we're pulling up the ladder behind us, for the reasons that I gave earlier, because there's a continuum between prosperity, social cohesion, political stability and security, we'll start to come unstuck. And as we leave the European Union, one of the most important benefits to me of that is taking up our independent seat at the World Trade Organization, where we can actually show leadership and passion about defending the concept, the philosophy of free trade. And believe me, there are lots and lots of countries out there who are looking to the UK to give leadership on that issue. And that is a challenge that we should take up with relish, because I think that we can make a fundamental difference to some of the arguments that are out there at the present time. And when I look in the UK at a Labour Party that can't even vote for a trade deal with Trudeau's Canada, and I wonder just how regressive, in fact, they're going to become. And when on one hand they talk about poverty and alleviating poverty, and on the other hand, they want to introduce all sorts of restrictions onto the very one system that's provided that alleviation of poverty in a historic sense. I find them so intellectually incoherent well, I won't actually say what I think in polite company, but this is, and it should be, an open target for a self-confident Conservative Party.
Oh, fantastic, thank you.
I can see you for the light here.
As a believer in competition, could you tell me why competitive provision of healthcare, free at the point of delivery, is something we may not encourage in the United Kingdom?
Well, we have competition in healthcare. There's quite a lot of healthcare you can get out there if you want it. I've always believed that the role of the state in health was to be the facilitator and to encourage quality provision. And I think that we've actually done that. The one thing I would say in favour of any part of the Blair government was the willingness of the Blair government under Alan Milburn to consider the introduction of more internal competition inside the health service. I think that was a brave thing to do. I think it's entirely too much for the current Labour leadership to consider at all. But we should be looking at the health outcomes as the key measurables in this country. And I think that we've got a good balance. A lot of countries now looking at the UK and saying, if you're looking at a balance between access to care and quality of outcomes, who are the countries who seem to have the balance right? I think increasingly people are looking to the UK to say, no healthcare system is perfect, but you look like you've got a pretty good balance between the two in the UK. Could we be improving it in a whole range of ways? Of course we could. But on balance, I think that the healthcare system in the UK is one of the places I would rather be if I was in particular trouble. And I say this because my young brother, who was in a very bad car accident and spent 3 months in intensive care, was testament to the quality that we get at the best from the NHS. Where I think the NHS sometimes doesn't do quite so well is in chronic healthcare, where it doesn't always deliver to the ability that it does in acute healthcare. And that's where I think we need to raise the quality. Thank you.